Lord Brown as well, he used to turn up to these call dinners, when you're called.
Yes, yeah.
And instead of sitting on the high table, he would sit with the students. You always need to run clients. The litigation there's always a risk. Even with the strongest case, even when you think you've got, almost a cast iron case, there's always litigation risk involved, and there is no certainty with litigation. The sense of fairness is very deeply ingrained in our judicial culture. I'm not that exposed to Mauritius, I don't know whether it's the same here, but at least in England it's a very deeply ingrained culture of fairness.
Hi everyone, I've got a small favor to ask. I know that many of you have been watching these conversations over the past couple of years with people who inspire. It would mean a lot to us and it would help us continue to have these conversations if you would just subscribe to the channel. Thank you. Adil, welcome.
Thank you very much.
It's such a pleasure to have you. I've been waiting for you to come to Mauritius to have you on the podcast. You are my oldest friend.
Yes, I know.
We've known each other, I think we were 10.
We were 10 or 9.
Yeah, I think it was grade 5. We had quite a stern teacher.
We did.
I don't think we got hit though. I think we were one of the lucky ones.
I think we were the good ones. But we did see quite a lot of corporal punishment.
I know, which was quite funny because we had Vincent Brass, as you remember, last year on the podcast. But he had such a good memory of primary. It's weird how the brains...
Because for us, that's such a vivid memory, right? The fact that other students
were getting beaten up on a regular basis.
by the teachers on a regular, almost daily basis.
Almost daily basis. And somehow we survived. But my first question to you was going to be, what memories do you have from, what impression when you think of your primary school years? What impression does that leave you with?
I've thought about this actually. I think they were quite hard years, I'll be honest. I think they were quite difficult because I always felt pressure. I don't know why. I think the system made us feel the pressure.
Yes.
And I was sort of trained to think that I had to do well, that I had to achieve these grades to get into the school.
Yeah.
So a lot of my school memories are linked to that. And linked to that is also all the tuitions. I'm sure you did the same. We were, waking up at 7, being sent to school, and then we would come home, get sent to someone else. So
it was relentless in a way.
Relentless.
And I remember those pictures of those, I can't remember whether I was one of them, with those kids with their backpacks almost bigger than themselves.
Yes, we were carrying all these books around. We were always sort of on the move, going from one thing to another. Even sometimes Saturdays. I mean, actually, I remember we had Saturday morning sessions in Quatre Bornes at 7 a.m. or 8 a.m.
Wow.
So it was quite relentless on that front. But home was very happy, I had very supportive parents and a lovely family home. But I think the reason why I was thinking about it is because my nephews are growing up and they're having quite a different experience from what I had, from what my brother had, because he went on the same journey.
And he was older than you.
He was older than me. That added to the pressure as well, because he was a high achieving student. Yeah. And so you were expected to do the same. And so, it sort of comes with mixed emotions, happy memories. We were having some fun, but I don't know what you think, but we weren't having that much fun.
Yeah, it was a bit of a blur for me. I don't think, I wouldn't classify it as fun, but I did think of it this morning as I was getting ready and thought, what was going to be my first question to you? And I thought it's a mixed bag because on the other hand, I thought when I look at the society today, private schooling is normal.
Yes.
Now. Whereas in nowadays, everyone, very unusual. Yeah. I think it was 1% of the population who probably went to private school. But what I liked about that is that it got together people from everywhere.
That's very true.
It was a great leveler.
It was a great leveler.
It gave opportunities to everyone.
That's true. And you meet people that you would not perhaps normally meet in your family life, in your social life.
Yeah.
That's true. And it also meant you were exposed to lots of different cultures, different things that people were doing. Yeah. And we were never, at school, we all sort of treated each other in exactly the same way, irrespective of whether we were, from whatever background. That was an amazing, it really felt sort of Mauritian rather
Totally, yeah.
than, dividing us into different little
Exactly. And you
groups.
wouldn't, because we were in an age that wasn't technologically
Yes,
driven, there was
yes.
no such thing as mobile phones,
No.
and it wasn't that who's wearing the latest brand. We
Not
were
at
all
all.
kind of
It
the
was a
same.
different era. When
Yeah.
Mauritius was kind of a sort of pure and
Yeah.
kind of simple society.
Yeah.
Lots of strong values instilled in us, I think. The
Yeah.
value of hard work, the value
Hard
of
work.
respecting each other, helping each other out, I think. We helped each other out quite a lot. Yeah, so it was very, it formed us. We are today what that experience made us, I think.
And I think it's very, I mean, I'm very, perhaps like you, sometimes very critical of the way the system was in terms of the pressure it put on children, the rote learning, the non-holistic approach. Having said that, when I look at our circle of friends,
yes,
and what the opportunities
that we got as a result. It's true.
I can only be grateful.
Yes, totally.
Yeah.
We have to be grateful to our education system. It wasn't perfect. There were lots of issues with it, but it did give us this platform that eventually, made us go places who we are and be competitive at, sort of on an international level.
Absolutely.
Which means that they did get something right, and we need to work out what is it that they got right and what is it that could be improved. So
it's a very, I'm feeling nostalgic thinking
very
about
nostalgic.
it. I'll be honest, even when I was at secondary school, I never thought I'd be a lawyer. Did you want to be a lawyer?
I don't know if I wanted to be, but it was something that was always mentioned to me that, oh, you like to argue, you like to debate.
Because you did sciences, didn't you?
I did sciences. I did a lot of debating. At home, people always used to say, oh, you'll be a lawyer.
Really?
My mum wanted me to be a doctor.
Okay.
And there's a funny story here where she arranged for me to go to see a post-mortem at Dr. Boulel's. He was the chief scientific, I don't remember his exact term.
Médecin-légiste.
Yeah, médecin-légiste. And I remember going to one of his sessions.
How old were you then?
Oh, I was probably 15 or 16. And it was the time when we're having to make decisions but she was keen for me to explore that option.
Was your brother already studying medicine then?
He had already started.
Okay.
And I went there, and within about 30 seconds, I fainted. And so it was very clear to me that medicine and the idea of dealing with bodies and blood and things like that was simply not going to work. I'm not sure I even wanted to do it, but it was something that, family pressure, I guess. Not pressure, but something that was mentioned. So law was kind of the other option. I did enjoy debating. We did quite a few things together.
Did we do, what was it called?
We did MUN.
We did MUN, and
we
there
did
was
Brains
something.
Trust.
Yes, that's the one.
I did a few other things as well. So it was something, if I'm being honest, did I think deeply about what I wanted to do in the future? I'm not sure, I'll be honest, I'm not sure I did. One thing that motivated me is to go abroad. That was a big motivation for me. I wanted to explore the world, be exposed to other cultures. Was quite keen to go to the UK. Law seemed to be interesting, but I don't think I had sort of a defined view of what it would mean for me to be a lawyer, have a career as a lawyer. It just was something that had been planted in my mind, and it sounded like something, it sounds quite nice and prestigious possibly.
Was there anyone in your family who were lawyers?
No, I'm the first in my family. I remember my dad arranging meetings with quite a few of his kind of friends, and at that age, it's hard to form a clear impression of what it actually means to be a practicing lawyer. You have you see them in the TV shows and on the news.
It's all glamorized.
It's all glamorized, but to be the sort of the daily grind of a lawyer, the discipline of a lawyer, I don't think you really understand that until later. Yeah,
I would say even when you're studying at university,
you don't know. You don't understand that. I think you really have to practice it to understand. The the trials and tribulations of
and the more so that, like me, you started as a solicitor.
I did, yes.
Which is very different. Well, sometimes when I try to explain it to my people I meet here, it's hard to grasp because most solicitors in Mauritius are litigation solicitors, whereas most solicitors in the UK are commercial, transactional.
Yes.
And like me, You went to a magic circle firm to do your training contract, and like me, you qualified in tax.
Yes.
So I was shocked when you decided to give up tax.
Can I just say on that though, which is
Yeah.
extraordinary, my very first transaction that
Yeah.
I worked on as a qualified
We
tax
were opposite
lawyer,
each other.
we were against each other. Can you imagine? We were in these two international law firms.
I didn't realize it was your first
My
transaction.
very first, because I'd come back from a sabbatical. You know, you get these sabbatical things.
Yes.
And in the week I came back, it was that transaction. And who was on the other side? You were. It was.
That is such a small
such a
world.
small
We
world.
were negotiating warranties on in tax indemnity.
We were doing this sort of standard tax indemnity
that is
warranties.
so funny.
Yeah.
Such a small world.
Yeah.
Yeah, so obviously, well, I love tax. You must have enjoyed it to decide to go in that field.
I did.
What made you decide to give up transactional law?
Well, a number of things. I already had an inkling before even sort of becoming a solicitor that I wanted to be a barrister.
Okay.
But I was an international student,
Yeah, it was
and the
so
bar
hard.
seemed quite a scary prospect. You know, you're self-employed, but it also seemed quite removed from the sort of person I was.
Right.
So
Did you try to get a pupillage?
I
or
didn't.
No,
No,
okay.
I didn't. I some of my tutors told me, you know, you should apply here and there, but I didn't do that. I got a training contract. I did that. But the idea was always there, to be honest. And I thought, you know what, I might do a few years of being a solicitor, get used to this sort of culture of sort of English lawyer society stuff, and then eventually possibly move to the bar. The reason why I ended up in tax is because I thought that was intellectually by far the most interesting thing I did.
I agree with you.
It was hard. You know, you actually used your brain when, I'm not saying others don't, no disrespect to other, but it was.
But just the books.
The
yellow books, I
books.
think there was about 4, and then there was the one orange book, and it was just
It
mountains
was law and technical stuff, and you really had to, with tax, you have to understand the true nature of a transaction to be able to give proper advice. So tax seemed very appealing from an intellectual perspective. But I also knew that eventually I didn't want to do something at Freshfields that I didn't enjoy, because I think that makes life very miserable if you're doing something you don't enjoy. But I knew eventually I kind of would eventually try to go to the bar. And the opportunity came with the financial crisis, because I was doing a lot of these, maybe you remember as well.
The tax-based structured
The tax-based structured, and it all stopped. I mean, almost overnight.
Yeah.
And I thought, you know, the bits that I enjoyed doing has now gone. Maybe this is the time to think about moving. And so I resigned from Freshfields. I got this job at the Supreme Court, and then I started applying for pupillages in that year. And, you know, I also didn't want to be a tax barrister, because at the Supreme Court I was getting exposed to many other areas of law, and I thought tax is interesting, but actually there are other areas of law that are really also quite interesting, and perhaps I didn't want to be too constrained by one area. As a barrister, I think as a solicitor you have more kind of flexibility, but so that's eventually the thinking that led me to leaving the tax field and also leaving the solicitor profession.
Tell me about your time at the Supreme Court.
It remains my most extraordinary year, because I was so lucky. I worked
So you were assigned to a judge or
two
several?
of them. I was assigned to Lord Rodger and Lord Brown. And I mean, really, it was an extraordinary year, because you're meeting them every day. So every day I had an hour session with Lord Rodger every single morning when the court was sitting, debating the cases he was sitting on. And he was someone...
One-to-one?
One-to-one in his office. And the discipline that brings, because you're terrified, you know, you're sitting with a law lord.
So you'll ask questions about what do you think about this?
He would ask questions. So well, the way it works is the court would have some time, would get the papers a week beforehand, you read the bundles, and then in the morning, before the hearing starts, you have a discussion with them, and he'd ask, what do you think of this point and that? So you have to be completely on top of your brief.
So you would have read, when you received the brief during the week before,
he would have read it.
You're reading it, you're also thinking about it, doing any research that you have to do.
And lots of things about which I had not been exposed to. I mean, the Supreme Court has a heavy diet of public law, which I hadn't really done, because at Freshfields it was mainly tax commercial. They were doing a lot of the public law, human rights work. So you had to sort of not only read it, get on top of it, but also get used to the language of that particular area of law. But it was extraordinary. And the other thing about it is the exposure to the advocacy from the advocates, because every week you have these barristers turning up, amazing advocates, and you see the different styles. No one was the same. They all had their own unique individual style, and you sort of think, what style,
what works,
You can see something works. Some were reading from scripts, and that's fine, because some people are not comfortable with just, and others would do it essentially just with references to the bundles without a script. Some would do it with bullet points. Some would do it in in kind of quite a conversational way. Some would do it in a more formalistic way. You see different styles and you think what suits best for your own personality and your own style. It was wonderful, and we did get to see these incredible cases.
And it's such an amazing experience prior to your pupillage.
Yes, totally, because it's a highly formative experience, and it helps you kind of work out what you really want to do as well. So it was, the whole year was magical, really. And I made some lifelong friends as well, my other judicial assistants. 2 of them are now KCs. And I went to their KC parties, and
Amazing.
it was.
So they're similar. So it's quite a common path. Would you say
it was a common path? Some were more senior than me. Okay. I think there were only 2 of us who were solicitors. Most of them were already junior barristers already practicing, or had finished pupillage and were about to sort of start, and therefore wanted a break and do that. So it was extraordinary. The other thing, I'll just mention it because it's relevant to where the world is today, particularly America, is Lord Rodger was very good friends with Antonin Scalia, who was Justice Scalia, who was a very conservative judge on the US Supreme Court. And he arranged a visit for us to the US Supreme Court for a week. So for a week, we shadowed Justice Scalia and also Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who was the very famous, you must have heard of her, the famous.
Of course.
And Ruth Bader Ginsburg was a very liberal judge. Antonin Scalia was a very conservative judge. They were best friends in life. They used to go to the opera together. They used to socialize and go out for dinner together.
Just their political views were very different.
But I mention that because today, you see America so polarized and hating each other.
Yeah.
At the time, they could still really disagree fundamentally on how their constitution worked, on how America should be as a nation, on how you interpret the Constitution. Scalia was a sort of literalist, purist. Ginsburg believed in purposive, modern. The Constitution is an ever-evolving instrument.
Yeah.
But it was fascinating to see them debate in their room next to each other. I have a lovely picture of the 2 of them with me. It's one of the most treasured possessions. So it was extraordinary that year. I mean, it really changed my life, really. And Lord Rodger remained a friend to me until he passed away. And Lord Brown remained a friend to me until he passed away last year. I used to go to their home. I used to socialize with their grandkids and children. So it was, for me, totally transformative.
What I'm hearing from you, I don't know whether it's common or not, but they were more than just your boss. They were mentors.
They were mentors, and they knew the effect they had on people because they were law lords, and they knew that you could...
The responsibility
that comes with it. They were very good at giving their time to so many things. I mean, not only to us, the judicial assistants, they didn't really need us. This was a favor they were essentially doing. They didn't need us to do anything for them. They have the best advocates giving them the best submissions.
Yeah, and then they have their own brilliant brains.
They have their own amazing brains. They've seen all of this. They were themselves amazing barristers. But they were willing, and they thought this was an important thing for them to do. And also the time they gave to other things. I mean, Lord Rodger was always going around seeing students. He didn't need to do that. Always doing it. Lord Brown as well. He used to turn up to these call dinners, when you're called.
Yes, yeah.
And instead of sitting on the high table, he would sit with the students. So suddenly the students would see, oh, who are you? I'm Lord Brown. And you think...
That's amazing.
I was at one of those dinners when he did that. I could see the effect it had on the people, that they were meeting someone like him. So I was very lucky. I had 2 really incredible judges who are definitely my bosses, and I look up to them. But they also became my friends, really. So I was incredibly lucky.
After that, presumably, you thought, this is what I'm meant to be doing.
Yes. During my year at the Supreme Court, I applied for pupillage, and I was lucky to get one. and I went to a chambers called Serle Court,
Which you're still there.
I'm still there. I was lucky to get a pupillage there, and I trained there, and I've been there for 12 years now.
Already
very
12
happily
years.
there.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm very lucky to be at a nice set of chambers. It's a very friendly set. We have that reputation of being very supportive to each other. And yeah, so that's what I've been doing.
And you haven't looked back since?
I haven't looked back. There are things that I miss about being a solicitor, the teamwork.
Transactions? Do you miss transactions?
I don't really miss transactions, actually. I miss being part of a team in the sense that at a law firm, there is a lot more interaction on a day-to-day, almost hourly basis, which you don't have as a barrister. Sometimes you're working in a team of barristers, which is good, but often you're on your own. You're the only counsel on the team, and you're responsible for all the barrister side of things. Yeah. So it can get lonely sometimes, but...
Do you work from home a lot, or do you...
No, I work from my chambers. I like going to work. I enjoy I listen to my podcasts when I cycle. Yeah. So that's kind of my little routine.
And what is do you have a particular area? You just do general commercial work?
The general area is called commercial chancery, and it means things like civil fraud. So not criminal stuff, it's civil fraud litigation, i.e. when companies or individuals are suing someone else because they've defrauded them or committed some, potentially unlawful acts. Yeah. A lot of company work. So company problems in the management of a company, litigation involving that. I do a lot of offshore work. So Bermuda, the Cayman Islands.
Nothing Mauritius yet?
I've done a bit of Mauritius work, but these other jurisdictions are much, much bigger in London in terms of the amount of work that comes to London.
Bermuda. Because the agreements are governed by English law as well?
Well, the Bermudian law and Cayman law and BVI law just follow English law almost completely.
Okay.
So you can be an English lawyer, but you're advising on a transaction that's Bermudian because there is no real difference in substance. And
presumably you rely on the same case, the English
same cases,
case law.
And they've got obviously the Privy Council as the final court of appeal. So we do a lot of that work. Yeah, it's very interesting work and challenging but tough.
Before I ask you the question about your most interesting case, do you still get nervous before you go to court?
I do. I think if you're not nervous,
there's something wrong with you.
I personally think there's something wrong, either because
you need that little adrenaline.
I've never been in court and not have the adrenaline rush. I mean, there's good nervous and bad nervous. Sure. Bad nervous can stop you from doing your job, but you do need that little kind of flutter of the heart before you start, and because that means you care. I think you can't be a good barrister and not care about your brief and doing a good job and delivering well and preparing as comprehensively as you can, because at the end of the day, you're the one standing there representing your client. You need to do your absolute best when you do that.
Have you ever felt, out of all the cases that you've done, that it didn't quite go the way you wanted?
It happens for various reasons, either because a point comes up that for some reason you weren't expecting. Sometimes your opponent is really good, and you've got there are some really good people, and on the day they do really well. Sometimes the judge just doesn't like a particular thing about your case or a point. It varies. But, most times you need to remind clients, you always need to remind clients, the litigation there's always a risk. Even with the strongest case, even when you think you've got, almost a cast iron case, there's always litigation risk involved, and there is no certainty with litigation. So you can never be absolutely sure that things will go your way. It's judges are humans. They may
always
take a different view of what's going on. So,
and do you try to, your sort of approach to litigation, do you try to get to a settlement if you can, or?
If settlement is the right outcome, sometimes it's obvious that unfortunately things have reached a situation where it'll have to be litigated. But settlement should always be one of the main things you think about initially, because you don't want people to be embroiled in expensive, stressful litigation.
Yeah, that goes on for years.
Litigation is very stressful. It's stressful for us as the practitioners, but it's particularly stressful for those to whom it matters most, i.e. the clients whose lives, whose business, whose
money.
affairs, whose money is most affected. So if things can settle, there's been such a great move to considering settlement mediation in recent years, which is absolutely the right thing to do. There are, however, times when it's clear that you will not settle a case and it has to be resolved by either a judge or an arbitrator, and otherwise we'll be out of
out of a job.
out of a job.
Or we'll become arbitrators.
Yeah.
What has been your either the case you're most proud of or the most enjoyable case that you've done?
Ooh. I think they might be both the same, actually.
Right.
It's a case I've worked on and I'm still working on 12 years on.
12 years on?
Yes.
Okay.
It's a case called, it's a piece of litigation involving a Taiwanese family. That it's an extraordinary family. The founders were born in poverty back in the 1920s and 30s, and they built this conglomerate in Taiwan, which from nothing became one of the largest companies in the world. It accounted at some point for 15% of Taiwan's GDP. It still employs, I think, 250,000 people. And I was a baby junior, walking along the corridor when the head of my chambers at the time told me, I need you to do some research on something. And I did it. And since then, I've been involved in that case. It's a case essentially about, so these two brothers set up this business, became wildly successful. And before they died, they put most of their wealth into these trusts. And these trusts are sort of a purpose trust. So they're not trusts for their children. They're trusts for purposes, for charitable, philanthropic, and business purposes. And unfortunately, after they passed away, there was litigation in the family. Some of the children
wanted to get hold of that money.
Yeah, didn't agree with what had been done. And it's a fascinating case, because it brings in all the good elements of being a barrister. There are some really interesting legal points, fascinating, really, legal points. It's also a very human story at the heart of it, because you learn about the history of these two amazing individuals. I mean, I think because they're Asian, we don't know about them, but in Asia, they're the Bill Gates of Asia. They're as famous as Bill Gates was, because they built the largest hospital in the world. They built the largest university, some of the largest universities in Asia. So, and I've lived through that case from starting it, working on it.
And it's still ongoing?
Yes, because it's on appeal at the moment. So we had a trial in the middle of COVID in 2021.
Online, presumably?
We had a 6-month online trial. And my side was successful mostly. And then it's now gone to appeal to the Court of Appeal in Bermuda. It's a Bermudan case. It's been very formative because I've been very lucky to work in that case with some amazing silks cases. And it's kind of been the running theme of my practice, because whilst I've done lots of other things, this case has always been around.
The common thread.
I've
you can always come back to it.
I can always come back to it. And, you make form very strong relationships with the team that you're working on. You're emotionally attached to the case as well, because you've kind of lived through all of it. And I feel the story is amazing as well, the story of these two men.
It sounds like it could be like a movie
It is. Well, there's a museum about them in Taiwan. When the elder brother died, it was a state funeral where I think over 100,000 people turned up, because he had done so much charitable work in his life. He had given so much.
Yeah, and wanted to continue
his legacy. These were men who
came from nothing.
From nothing, poverty, to build a multi-billion business. So you're in awe of them as well when you read the stories of how they achieved that. They didn't really go to school, and I think they went to school, but they didn't go to university. Yet they built this highly complex conglomerate. And we saw pictures of what they built. These are cities. Some of the industrial complex are vast projects, spanning kind of vast
whole
spaces in Taiwan, and reclamation of land. It's just extraordinary. So that is a case, I think, that has been very enjoyable, because both intellectually and personally it's been lots of fun. And also, we've so far done well. So it's been,
fingers crossed that you continue
crossed.
to win.
Yeah.
Was there any case where, you said something that I find interesting. In commercial work, maybe it's easier to detach emotionally.
Yes.
Do you always view a case with detachment?
It depends what you mean by detachment. I mean, you can't,
Emotional
you've got to be
detachment,
objective and
course.
to give
Independent,
objective
yeah.
advice. And it's very important not to sort of think of yourself as just
The mouthpiece of your client.
I mean,
yeah.
ultimately, you sort of are, as a barrister, you are the person speaking on behalf of your client. But it's important to remain objective at all times. But, you know, sometimes you do get attached to a particular case because of some issues, or so you do get emotionally involved in a loose sense of the word, but you can't become kind of part of the case itself. You're outside. You're ultimately a service provider doing a job.
And you're probably not giving the client the service they deserve if
you're unable to look at things objectively, because then you're not going to give accurate or good advice, and it will eventually backfire and go pear-shaped. Yeah.
I mean, one of the things that I think is a huge deterrent in the UK, and I suppose it's still the case, how competitive it is to get a pupillage, how hard it is to get a pupillage. I think the route that you took, not that made it easier, but it gave you opportunities that maybe if you had applied straight after uni, wouldn't have been possible.
Yeah.
What advice do you have for young Mauritians who feel that after their university they have to come straight back to Mauritius because it's so hard to get a pupillage? What advice would you have for them?
Yes, not only pupillage now, I think even getting a training contract has become extremely
harder
difficult.
Than when we were.
Much harder, because I do a bit of mentoring, etc., and I hear the stories about how, I'm not talking about Mauritian students specifically.
Just generally for
generally there is, because London is such an enormously desirable legal market, and all the law firms are there. Getting a training contract now has become, I think, it's not from personal experience, but from speaking to people, extremely difficult. So both training contract and getting a pupillage is challenging. I think perseverance and try and apply. I think these days I hear, people telling me we've applied to 4 rounds of pupillage, so 4 years. Sometimes 3-4 years they're doing it, trying again and again. And it's just because it's so competitive. But if you really want something, you've got to persevere and try again and build a CV that might appeal to chambers or to these law firms. And that you do by looking at the sort of people they're recruiting and working out what is it they want, sometimes doing a master's, sometimes doing some other legal related work. But it's not easy, but it's worth it at the end, because if that's what you really want to do, you've just got to sort of persevere and try it at least a few times to see if you can get there. But I think that the route to becoming a barrister and the route to becoming a solicitor has become much harder these days. So a lot of pre-planning as well, or even in your first year at university, if you think, you know what, I think I might want to try this, think about mooting, think about joining debating societies, think about building that CV that will appeal to a chambers that thinks, okay, this person obviously really wants this. They've been trying to get to a stage where they can apply and have a really good CV. So I think nowadays it was probably slightly easier at least to get in a law firm. Pupillage was always hard, but I get the impression that now it's even harder because it's
in a way I find that surprising, in so much as I thought after the chaos of Brexit that it would make it easier for non-EU people to get jobs in London, because when we applied, I was told not to apply to certain firms because if you don't have an EU passport, don't bother applying.
Right.
So I only applied to Magic Circle firms.
Right.
And can't remember, I got an offer from another firm, but I think I only applied to about 10 firms because the other firms told me don't bother. So I thought somehow it would be easier now because we don't have this restriction.
Weirdly, I think Brexit may have been good for the legal market, because London legal market anyway. Some areas of the way our jurisdiction rules work, etc., have been relaxed or changed as a result of Brexit. So a lot more stuff happening in the courts that we couldn't do because we were bound by European regulation. But I don't get the impression that the legal market has really suffered as a result of Brexit. I mean, a lot of other areas of the economy have, but that's one area which has kept on booming and being very successful.
And London has always been a little bit.
It has been, and English law is a very reliable, system of law, and the English courts remain highly respected. Language is also a massive advantage. So it has remained, I think, and you look at the investment in the legal market in London, it's still, I wouldn't say booming necessarily, but it's still very strong.
Yeah.
There is still a huge legal market in London, and therefore people from all over the world want to come and work there, and it's
making it even harder. Now they have, I don't think you do LPC anymore. I think you do the SQE.
You do.
And I know the initial years were the fail rates were really high.
Were they?
I think it was about 40 to 50%.
Oh gosh.
Fail rate.
Whereas when we did the LPC, it was almost like a joke, really.
I mean, it was.
We didn't really work at all. It's all changed.
How interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. The other question I had for you was, I mean, this is something that we've debated many times over, and I think we share common values on that front, is sometimes we get very frustrated with the lack of meritocracy.
Yes.
And democracy in the workplace in Mauritius.
Yes.
Have you ever felt that in the UK?
No. And I think that's one of the reasons why I have loved being in the UK, because I have never really felt that I didn't get or got something because of a name or a particular look or background. I think Britain still has a pretty amazing culture of meritocracy. I'm not saying it's the same across all spheres of British society, but in the field I've been, I've personally never felt that I'm not getting something or I'm getting something because of things that matter maybe in Mauritius. That has been a major reason why I haven't come back, because I find that very difficult to deal with. I feel that there's still a lot of who you know, who you don't know.
It's ingrained in our cultural DNA.
I think it's ingrained in a lot of cultures, but I think luckily in the sphere I'm in the UK, I don't feel that.
Even at the bar?
Even actually the bar is even more welcoming. I mean, the bar it gives this impression of being a very closed.
Yes,
actually,
it does.
The people there are incredibly supportive. I mean, they speak in their particular way, etc., and you get put off, but actually they're very, very supportive people, very inclusive. And you look at the bar and you think, oh, it's mostly, a particular demographic.
Or Oxbridge.
But
which actually that part is slightly true though, I think.
It's slightly true, that is true to some extent. But once you're in there, and I don't know whether maybe that's not looking at it from a sort of rose-tinted perspective, I've never felt that people are not discriminated against. And I've just been a member of Chambers, and that's been it. And I don't think it would have been like that in Mauritius. I think it would have been probably a different experience.
I think it would have been a different experience. And one thing that actually what you say really rings true. As you know, I went to London in February, and I met a barrister last year at a tax conference. And I just mentioned to him, we're coming to London in February. And he just said, you're welcome to use my chambers for a whole week, no problem. They were working from home, but there was always someone at the chambers. And it just welcomed us with open arms. And I just thought that was, he met me for the first time. And I just thought that's the true nature of what collegiality should be about.
There's very much that culture of supporting each other.
Yeah, I really, really appreciated that. Yeah. And thank you very much for all the tips that you gave me.
Oh no, you did so well. It was. I watched it. I didn't watch it live, but I watched it. They gave you quite a hard time, but I think you dealt with the questions.
The questions came like one after the other.
Quick fire questions.
But that's the other thing that I really appreciated, and I think you probably will agree with me that and it must be the same at the Supreme Court, and I don't know about the other courts in the UK, is that everyone is treated the same in terms of it doesn't matter whether you're a Casey or what you look like you said, everyone is on the same playing field.
And I think that's why London still attracts so much international work, because for a lot of people, we get a lot of cases in the London courts that have got nothing to do with England, nothing at all.
It just happened that
but they
it's
want to
governed by
be
English
here.
law.
But they want to be. When I say here, they want to be in England because they know the quality of the judiciary, the impartiality and the fairness of the judiciary. It's a real treasured thing that we've got, and I hope it never changes. Our judiciary is a real gem in the kind of British, what England still has to offer, what Britain still has to offer. The clients can be very unhappy when they lose a case, but they will never.
I had an unfair trial.
They will never say that. They'll say, oh, this didn't go well, or something has gone wrong, whatever. But they will never say, oh, I think the judge was biased, or that the judge was not doing his job properly. They can see the diligence with which the judge is applying his mind or her mind to something and the way it's been run. So that's always a comfort that, they can come to a place and they might lose a case, they might win a case, but it's never because something wrong has happened in the background or they've not been given a fair hearing. Yeah. The sense of fairness is very deeply ingrained in our judicial culture. I'm not that exposed to Mauritius. I don't know whether it's the same here, but at least in England, it's a very deeply ingrained culture of fairness.
And long may it continue.
Long may it last, because it's been a great strength and been
wonderful. I have a last question for you. Is there anything you miss about Mauritius?
So much, so much. I miss my parents, I miss my friends, I miss the food, I miss the weather. I miss it a lot. And I'm always reading about Mauritius. I'm always listening to the news, reading the papers. I feel Mauritian. I don't feel, British in the sense that I feel still very connected to this country. But I know I couldn't live here. I think that's clear to me. So I think you can still be a Mauritian and not live here. I think that's still possible.
Yeah, and still be attached to your roots.
Very much attached to my roots, but not be physically present all the time.
Sorry, I have one last question because you mentioned something about that's why you couldn't live here. Is that one of the things that the governments over the past few, I would say, decade have been desperately trying to do is to attract back the diaspora.
Yes.
And I personally think that it's not by giving a 10-year tax holiday that you're going to, because they're there for a different reason. They're not there because of the money. No. They're there for a different reason. If there's one thing that you would change, what would it be?
About coming back to...
Not necessarily to convince you, but, because they said that they were going to set up a diaspora council, whatever that will do. What is it that you think will be a strong pull factor?
Again, I have to speak from my own personal perspective. I think if I felt it was purely a meritocratic society that doesn't operate on perhaps the basis of who you know, and that would be a strong pull. I think there is still a concern that things happen in Mauritius where maybe it's not necessarily because of how well you've done or badly you've done, is because of other factors. And I think that would, for a lot of Mauritians I've spoken to who don't live in Mauritius, that is a major reason. Because the quality of life here can be so good. The country is a beautiful country. The people are amazing. You've got so many things you will never have in the UK. And now with an interconnected world, you can travel.
And it's so easy to...
So easy, you go fly to Dubai and connect. And this is no longer... But maybe 25 years ago, you could say, well, once you come to Mauritius, you can't explore the world anymore. That's no longer true. But I think there are some aspects of the way at least Mauritian society is perceived. Perhaps by people like me who've not been there for so long, maybe it's an unjust perception. I don't know. Maybe things have changed.
I don't think things
have changed. But I certainly felt growing up that there was a lot of things that don't really reflect my own way of...
and your values.
And my values. I'm the sort of, I sort of like anonymity. I don't like people getting involved in what you're doing as well. And some of these things don't happen in Mauritian society. People always interested in what you're doing. In London, you go to work, you come home, no one interferes in your business. No one is asking you what you're doing. No gossip. None of that. I know this might sound petty, but these little things, I think, actually, to some people matter. But perhaps I'm asking for a fundamental rethink of how Mauritian society works, so that might not happen.
Yeah, well, maybe not in this generation.
Maybe not
but
in this
maybe
generation.
in a few generations.
Well,
I
having
think.
said that, many of us of our year have returned and have had very, great success here. So
yeah, I think it depends on
you
why
are the
you're
prime example of having come back and doing incredibly well. So
thank you. Depending on why you're returning. I think it's never been a secret that I came back mainly for the quality of life of my children.
Yes.
As you know, I had an amazing job.
Yes.
A bank which I loved. I had an amazing boss at JP Morgan. I loved my job. So I didn't come back for the career. It just so happens that I happened to be in a practice area that wasn't well developed in Mauritius.
And so you built it up.
I managed to make it meritocratic just because there was no one else doing it. I think if I was just a run-out-of-the-mill corporate lawyer
it would have
or
been
just
hard.
A normal generalist barrister, it would have been a very different story.
Yeah.
But there's hoping. There's hoping that things will change. Thank you so much. I know you're in Mauritius for like a week.
No, thank you for having me. It's been a great pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks.